Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare. I'm Cassidy Cash. I'm the host of That Shakespeare Life, the podcast that goes out on Mondays, and every Saturday we're here with tidbits of Shakespeare's history. This week we're taking a look at the 16th century household manual written by Sir Hugh Plat. He has a recipe for turning blue ink into red ink. He calls it How to Write with Blue and Red Ink at Once. In the 16th century, ink was either made with carbon ink or iron gall ink for most people's writing needs. This includes legal documents, historical documents, wills, and all kinds of paper. If you were writing letters or anything of that sort, you would probably use black ink made in one of these two formats. But red, blue, yellow, orange, and other color pigments did exist. They were rare in the household, but it seems that they were common enough that Sir Hugh Plat felt like the average household would have one when he gave this recipe in his book from 1594. Interestingly, 1594 is the year that William Shakespeare formed the Lord Chamberlain's Men. So this was right during a time when Shakespeare would have known about this book and these recipes. Sir Hugh Plat wrote a series of manuals, and they were all household manuals and how-to things. He ended up being so inventive that he got knighted by King James I for these bits of advice that he was providing. He was an inventor, and I guess you could call him an alchemist, but mostly he focused on just practical things that you could do. This particular book that we're going to be working from today is called The Jewel House of Art and Nature, and it included things like how to hold a hot iron with your bare hand, or how to fatten up a horse when you're going on a long ride, and dozens of other small tricks of the trade that were just practical, helpful things for daily life and around the house. One that's particularly interesting and that we're going to focus on in our experiment for today is how to write with blue and red ink when all you have is blue ink. He calls it, quote, how to write both blue and red letters at once with one self same ink and pen and upon the same paper. The experiment he outlines works a lot like the kits you used to get for invisible ink. It uses lemon juice, which when you put lemon juice on the paper is clear, and the blue ink covers it up, revealing the red ink. So it's actually a science experiment involving the acid in the lemon juice reacting with the blue ink and turning it red. The natural base for the blue ink in Hugh's recipe creates a chemical reaction, and that's how the red ink gets created. But you can do it too at home with items you likely already have in your home or can easily get at your local market or store. Here's how to do it. You start with some blank paper. Lemon juice does bleed through regular printer paper, so you may want to use something thicker like watercolor paper. But as I'm not going to be hanging this up anywhere as an art piece, printer paper worked just fine for me. I don't recommend using lined notebook paper though, since those pages already contain ink and could mess up your colors and your experiment. First, we want to prep our ink. Now, I pre-tested this and I tried both watercolor paint as well as blue Sharpies, and it doesn't work with commercially available ink we have today. So that makes me think a natural-based ink might work, but for this experiment, I decided to use a 16th century recipe and make my own natural blue ink. Now, since I'm unable to find a 16th century recipe that calls for hazelnuts the way this reference in Sir Hugh Plat's book does, I found some ink recipes that use walnut oil, but in general for Shakespeare's lifetime, inks, and especially inks made at home, were crafted with whatever that household had at the time, using a few staple ingredients that could be interchanged. A lot like how if you're cooking a recipe today and you don't have canola oil, you can use grapeseed oil or olive oil. There's a lot of different options, and ultimately they accomplish the same thing. There'll be some variations, but it all generally worked to get the job done. So I assume that hazelnuts was probably what Sir Hugh Plat had at the time, and that a lot of different ingredients could be substituted there. And since I didn't have hazelnuts on hand, I decided to use my own concoction of 16th century ink, and I based mine on blueberries. I found some references to 16th century ink that said berries could be used as the base for a natural paint, so that's what I used. I had some frozen blueberries, and first I warmed them up, and then I smashed them in a cup to get the blue juices out of there. Now, it looks very purple right now, but hang with me. It actually turns blue when you put it on the paper. But I smashed up the blueberries, and then I mixed in the gum arabic and conduit water that Sir Hugh Plat recommends in his manual, but I used tapioca starch as my gum arabic substitute, and I used tap water since I don't live near a conduit. Mixing all this together and allowing it to sit for several minutes, you'll want it to sit for a full hour to properly follow Hugh's advice, and it does indeed paint blue on the page. Now, having my blue ink ready and a sample square set out on the page for comparison, I used pre-juiced lemon juice and I painted a square of that onto the page. It goes on invisible like Hugh Plat says it will, and I left it to dry, as his recipe indicates that's important. While waiting on the lemon juice test square to dry, I wrote out Shakespeare in lemon juice to see if we can get that to change colors and allowed that to dry as well. Once the lemon juice was sufficiently dry, it took about 15 minutes. I painted over it with the blue ink. At first, it goes on blue and you get really scared thinking nothing's happening. But then after about 10 minutes, as the blue ink dries on top of the lemon juice, everywhere the lemon juice is interacting with the ink does start to turn pink. What do you know? A nearly 500-year-old recipe for writing with two color inks at once really works. And now you can try it too. That's it for this week. Thank you for being here. If you like experiments like this one and you enjoy taking a piece of Shakespeare's history and trying it out for yourself, I encourage you to join that Shakespeare Life membership. Each month, we send you an activity just like this one that you can do at home with items easily acquired already in your house or from your local market or store. They're not complicated, but they're designed to be very fun and interactive ways to take a slice of Shakespeare's life and try it out for yourself at home. You can find out more about that and join us inside the members area at CassidyCash.com/experience. I'm Cassidy Cash. Thank you for being here. I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Oh, wait, before you go, be sure to check out the show notes of today's episode because all of the links to the history, including where you can read the entire book, The Jewel House of Art and Nature by Sir Hugh Plat, completely digitally online. I've linked to all of that in the show notes for today's episode, so make sure you go to the link below this video to find those. Bye-bye.